The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for letting me sit in on the committee today and participate. I thank our witnesses and everyone here that's come to the committee hearing. Elections have consequences, and certainly we are living through the consequences. We have wide open borders with over 5.3 million people who have attempted to come into our country. Fentanyl is now the #1 cause of death of young people from ages 18 to 45. We also have the very unfortunate circumstance of possibly moving towards World War III with the escalation of the war in Ukraine and the United States backing it. And then something I care a lot about is our kids. Unfortunately, there is a trans ideology that is coming after our children, and I think that's something. So elections have consequences, and the 2020 election had consequences. And according to polling as recent as June 2023, only 32% of all voters, Republican, Democrat, Independent, believe that there was no cheating in 2020. So this is a very important hearing, and this is an important bill that is being presented before you. And in coming up on the 2024 election, 54% of all voters expect voter fraud. So I'm very glad to be participating. For my role in the ACE Act, I've introduced the District of Columbia Voter Identification Act, which will be an important piece of this package, hopefully to be brought forward as a model for all states. This requires voter ID, and the reason why we introduced this is because in the District of Columbia, they wanted to let anyone vote, foreigners, illegals, anyone that lived in the District of Columbia, including foreign nationals, diplomats, and that shouldn't be happening. So there will be no illegal aliens voting, and I think that's important. And also, it requires ID, and ID is important. It requires driver's licenses, a passport, military photo ID, student ID, or the last 4 digits of the voter's social security number. This is an important issue because ID is required not only for many things like buying alcohol if you're 21 years of age, but also to receive SNAP benefits, which many poor people unfortunately do have to receive. They also have to prove identity, ID, like a social security number. I don't think ID is a race issue. ID is part of being a U.S. citizen, and it should be a requirement to vote. And this is something that should be required for everyone. So I don't think there should be any partiality or be considered racist. So I'd like to ask our panel here, Dr. Ruth, do you consider IDs to be racist?
I do not.
Okay. Mr. Spakowski?
I do not. And I do not, and the evidence shows they're not.
Okay. Ms. Nureddin?
I believe ID is important, however, there must be a
Microphone.
I believe ID is important. I agree, definitely. However, there must be a reasonable remedy for people who are challenged in this way. What I fear is that someone who's eligible to vote who may not have ID can't. And so, no, I don't want non-citizens.
But it's not racist as long as everyone's able to get an ID. Thank you, Ms. Nureddin. Ms. Woodward? I'm sorry, Ms.
Woolard. It's Woolard. By definition, IDs can't be racist, but I do think that the lack of IDs in a county like Fulton County, where we have the highest level of income inequality in the country, presents certain challenges for people.
Ms. Woolard, it could only be racist if we're identifying someone's skin color, not their citizenship in the country. Thank you for answering my question. Now, another thing to talk about for the state of Georgia is the fact that my former husband was told when he went to vote in 2020 that he had already voted by absentee ballot. He never requested an absentee ballot form. He never turned in an absentee ballot to vote, and he wanted to vote in person. He was forced to sign an affidavit at that time surrendering a ballot he never voted on in order to vote in person in the 2020 election. He was called a liar. I was called a liar. He hired an attorney, did a FOIA request, And it proved, after the FOIA and all the work was done, there was never an absentee ballot turned in his name, never a request form with an envelope turned in his name. But the Secretary of State said that he voted by absentee ballot. And the Secretary of State has never answered our question on why that's happened. So I just wanted to state that for the record today. There's definitely problems in elections. SB 202 has done a great job in turnout, giving a 57% higher than national midterm average of 52%. But there definitely is a cause, and this is why people are here, and they care about our elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. Mr. Collins from the state of Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I couldn't help but to notice you mentioned the Braves, but as being a good citizen of the 10th District, we have the Georgia Bulldogs that are back-to-back.
Bulldogs.
Maybe a three-peat, and you can mention that when you come back in the fall. Wait a minute now. I've got time going here. Folks, this is my first time being elected. I'm a freshman in Congress, but I've spent many years in county politics as a county chairman. So I've worked those polls, and I had to work them personally because I know how hard it was to get people to show up to work the polls. And that was the case. Now, it's not anymore, but that was the case. And I want to focus on a couple of things that I don't think we've touched on too much today. And Mrs. Spakowski, I'd like to focus on cleaning up our voter rolls. And I don't know how much your knowledge of the Electronic Registration Information Center is, but that's kind of what I want to hit on right now, because at least 7 states have pulled out of this electronic registration to so-called improve our voter rolls. Do you see any concerns with ERIC?
Yes, in fact, I published a paper some months ago pointing out many of the problems with ERIC. I mean, just to give you one quick example, the whole purpose of ERIC is, excuse me, for states to share their statewide computer lists to find, for example, people who are registered in more than one state, for example, perhaps Georgia and Florida. But as we talked about before, excuse me, being a citizen is a requirement, and yet the ERIC membership agreement bars states when they're providing their statewide voter list and their DMV lists, which are also used to check this information, from providing any information that indicates the citizenship status of an individual. For example, who's got a driver's license. Why would you bar that information? That's relevant to whether someone should be registered or not. I understand why those states have pulled out. I believe they're working on an alternative, trying to set up an alternative that won't have some of these problems that ERIC has, and I encourage them to do that.
Has the founder of ERIC previously shared information with outside resources?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Has the founder of ERIC, David Becker, has he been known to share information with outside election organizations?
Well, in fact, that's another issue that the withdrawing states haven't been able to get a clear answer to, and that is whether their confidential voter registration information has been shared with third parties, particularly third parties that might be using it for partisan purposes.
Would you agree with me that the highlight that's been put on voting today, it would be better to be decentralized and let local people like they used to go back and start cleaning up our voter rolls?
I think states, there are many, many things states can do to clean up their voter rolls. The one thing that they can't do on their own is the state of Georgia doesn't have the ability to get information on its own of who might be registered in both Georgia and Florida without the cooperation of Florida. So some kind of agreement needs to be there for the sharing of data. There used to be a second program that did that. It was called the Kansas Interstate Crosscheck Program, but it was driven out of business by lawsuits filed by the ACLU and others who didn't want a rival to ERIC.
And that happens a lot, not just in that, but in the next thing that I want to talk to you, and thank you, I'm running short. Ms. Narudin, tell your son thank you for his service, first of all. Dominion machines. Georgia's got more than any other state in the union, I believe. Probably about 10,000. Is it cheaper to use Dominion machines or paper ballots?
Microphone.
I would have to say it's probably 10 times more expensive to use those Dominion machines. As a small county, they only had one polling precinct until Mr. Spakowski clearly hit the nail on the head and we got sued and we had to open up more polling places and we didn't get any more extra voters in the 2022 election than we did 2020. We had to go out and spend extra money on all those new Dominion machines, which now has not been updated, and there's clearly a cyber security threat with those machines because there is a patch that they want you to implement, and nobody wants to update them in Georgia.
To answer your question, if I may, sir.
You can, the witness can comment.
Yes, thank you. Fulton has over 830,000 registered voters, and I think that there would be a challenge conducting a paper ballot election for Fulton in particular. You know, as far as the cost of it, I don't know, but I will say that comparing Fulton to a county with 10,000 people is just not fair.
We've got 28,000.
28,000, okay.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. I got a lot more questions, but I'll yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking our witnesses questions. I will note that after the passage of SB 202, apparently Georgia's won a World Series with the Atlanta Braves, and the University of Georgia won 2 national football championships. So I can't believe that there's any state in the country that's not trying to pass voter integrity legislation. I say that as a firm believer in the University of Wisconsin and a Brewers fan. But in a serious sense, as we look at the impact that SB 202 had here in Georgia, as we think about the American Confidence in Elections Act, the ACE Act that we've introduced today, I want to go back, if I can, Dr. Ruth, with you, and look back at a University of Georgia survey that they did after the election. In particular, it asked people about whether or not they faced voting problems. In particular, we had a lot of conversation about underrepresented minority groups and some of the challenges that they may face. In that survey, do you know what it said as it related to African Americans who faced, quote, no voting problems?
Just to give a little background, that the UGA survey, the UGA surveyed 1,253 registered voters. 64% voted early, 30 voted on Election Day. And it is true that 0% of African Americans responded that they had a poor voting experience.
That's a pretty positive thing after we were told that SB 202 was Jim Crow 2.0 by the President of the United States. Following analysis of that data and your knowledge of the Georgia election law, do you believe that SB 202 was truly Jim Crow 2.0?
I do not.
You do not. I think that's really important because it's easy to have false narratives thrown at election integrity legislation like the ACE Act. But when we examine the underlying empirical data, often we're finding that those narratives are false and are simply trying to scare people from passing strong voter integrity provisions that at the end of the day increase voter turnout. And so if I can jump to you, Ms. Nuruddin, as we look at the turnout in the 2022 election, was the turnout rate in Georgia higher than the national average?
I believe it was.
Yeah, it was 57%, the national average was 52%. So following Georgia passing an election integrity bill and implementing that bill, Georgia's voting at a higher rate than the national average. To me, giving further evidence that passing election integrity actually enhances individuals' confidence in their elections, and as a result, more people are participating in the process as they have confidence in the elections. If I can go back to you, Dr. Ruth, on something we talked about as related to ballot drop boxes. In Georgia before COVID, so go back to 2018 and before, were ballot boxes legal in the state of Georgia?
No, they were not.
They were not. And then following the passage of SB 202, ballot drop boxes are now legal. There's rules and regulations around them, but they're now legal in the state of Georgia. Is that accurate?
They are.
So it'd be fair to say that SB 202 actually increased the use of ballot drop boxes in the state of Georgia, did not decrease them in the state of Georgia.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. And then if I can come to you, Mr. Van Spakovsky, looking at President Biden's executive order, it's 14019, because I know you're a numbers guy and in the details, quote, promoting voting access, end quote. It requires federal agencies to do a lot of things, but it does a lot of stuff that really is partisan election work. Do you have concerns that federal agencies would be using federal taxpayer dollars to engage in partisan elections?
Yes, and the problem with that executive order was that the president had no constitutional or statutory authority to start directing federal agencies to not only engage in voter registration activities, but also was telling them to help voters obtain and vote their absentee ballots. I mean, that's outlined in the executive order. And this is so potentially confusing to voters and to state election officials that a number of secretaries of state protested this, saying you are going to confuse our voters. And just one other thing on this, Mr. Chairman, I think is very important. Individuals who are members of the public who are applying, for example, for benefits, vulnerable members of the public, veterans benefits, Social Security disability benefits, and suddenly the federal clerk they're dealing with says, oh, by the way, you need to get registered to vote. Oh, and can I help you with your absentee ballot? What are those vulnerable members of the public to think? Boy, I better do this. I better vote for the...
You and I, Mr. Spakovsky, share the same concerns on this, that when you allow the federal government to use federal taxpayer dollars for election partisan purposes, there's a whole host of concerns. Let me come back to one final point that I think is really important. Our bill prevents that, might I add. But as we look at funds coming into elections under the guise of charitable entities, 501c3, 501c4s, the risk in particular of Zuckerbucks or of nonprofit entities getting involved in electioneering, I have grave concerns with. Another thing that I have real serious concerns with is foreign money coming into U.S. elections with the loophole of charitable entities. Does this bill clear up both the loophole which currently would allow Zuckerbucks to come through and obtain a tax-free advantage? This closes that, correct?
It closes it, and this is a needed change in federal law.
And then the second one that it closes is prevents a foreign actor, a foreign person, a non-citizen, from putting money into a U.S.-based charity, which would then be transferred to a super PAC to then do the bidding of a foreign actor. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and again, that is a needed change.
I think at a minimum, those are two things that my colleagues across the aisle should be supportive of. I think those are absolutely critical reforms. I'm going to now yield back to myself before we close this hearing. Just want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Thank you to our audience. I think on the whole, we kept it in check as we were going through a pretty important topic. But I also want to give a big thank you to the staff and the students at Georgia State University. We just can't thank you enough for your hospitality today. I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I want to add my thanks to Georgia State and their beautiful facility here. And thank you to everyone who participated in trying to make this civil. We obviously have disagreements. But I come from Rochester, New York, which was the home of Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. The right to vote is our birthright as Americans, and we have to do everything we can to ensure that every American has the opportunity to vote. And I look forward to a bipartisanship coming together that we can eliminate the disparity between black voters and white voters and throughout American elections. Before I conclude, Mr. Chairman, I would like to seek unanimous consent. The following be added to the record. First, a series of articles by Mark Neese, published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. There are several of them, and excuse me. and the following expert reports filed in the consolidated lawsuits against SB 202, which demonstrate the law's discriminatory and unlawful impact on individuals of color. Expert reports by Dr. Carol Anderson, Dr. Bernard Fraga, Dr. Stephen Pettigrew, and Dr. Barry Burden. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to add those to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir.
For what purposes, the gentleman seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to submit something for the record. It was mentioned earlier today, as well as in this hearing, a Brennan study that made the claim that total turnout between 2022 and 2018 had decreased. I would like to submit for the record the actual Georgia Secretary of State's data that shows that voter turnout actually did increase between 2018 and 2022. However, white voter participation between 2018 and 2022 actually decreased. Non-white voter participation significantly increased between 2018 and 2022, and that is raw data from the Georgia Secretary of State's office.
Without objection, so ordered. Again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here, Georgia State University for hosting us today. Members of the committee may have additional questions for you. We'd ask that you please respond to those questions in writing. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative days to insert additional materials into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there's no further business, I thank the members for their participation. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.